I'm Dan.
And I'm Alex.
And welcome back to On Air. It's another Wednesday, and we, as always, have some very juicy news this week.
So much going on.
And it just always feels as exciting to be able to connect with you, Alex, every Wednesday to spill the tea. How are you doing?
How's it going? How have you been? How were your recent travels?
I had a lot of travels in the past week, which I don't feel we need to get into here because we had so many stories in last week's episode. All I want to say about last week's episode is to everyone who heard us trash Changi Terminal 1 and talk about the Jewel, and people were commenting, a few people, not the majority, a few people were commenting that Jewel has nothing to do with Changi Airport. The Jewel is a mall owned by a separate company. Please go to Changi Airport's official website. Go under the restaurant directory, go under the store directory, go under the services directory. Every single thing on Changi's official website lists restaurants and stores in the Jewel. Go on Changi Airport's Instagram, you will see the Jewel constantly. So don't come here telling us that the Jewel has nothing to do with Changi Airport. They are linked like this, and they are connected in every piece of marketing. Every time someone talks about Changi Airport, the Jewel is the major part of that. So that's what I had to say.
No, you're absolutely right. This is which we spoke about the Jewel at Changi. So let us not just pretend that the Jewel happens to geographically be situated close to Changi Airport. This is a key part of Changi Airport's infrastructure, hospitality offering to the world, and is why Singapore receives so many awards globally, as well as the world's best airport just a few days ago from Skytrax, which we've spoken about before. Of course, we're not saying that Skytrax is the gold standard, but in terms of internationally recognized, they are the largest, and they were recognized because of the Jewel. The Jewel plays a massive role in earning Singapore the status that it does. And to anyone else wondering about our thoughts on Singapore's entire aviation ecosystem, if you go back a couple of episodes when we were in the studio in Singapore itself, we were super honest, I would say sharp and accurate on how Singapore's incredibly intelligent aviation strategy, with fifth freedom, with being incredibly liberal, with an open market, with encouraging the world to set up shop in their back garden, has benefited the city-state as a whole and has let it emerge as an aviation superpower. So yeah, you're right. It wasn't the full picture in some of the feedback that we had, but it is without question the Jewel is a Changi Airport product.
Yeah, and you can't tell us otherwise. So I think that the thing is, that episode we recorded in Singapore a while ago, that was so positive. And then this episode, last week's, ended up being mostly negative. So
it was
you
realistic,
need to watch
that's
both.
why.
Yeah, you need to watch both for that context. Anyway,
should we dive straight, or do you want to go on?
No, we have a big, obviously, headline that you guys will know about, probably the headline of this episode. But first, there's another huge headline, and that is the My Points Master sale, where I teach you how to fly first and business class for 20 to 80 or 90% off. Even Alex, might benefit from these skills someday when he decides to text me to ask for help.
Here's hoping you would think I would have like a co-host discount, but apparently I just also benefit from the twice a year sale that Dan's launched for everyone else. But I'm still happy with that. Go on.
And you have yet to join, unlike everyone else who's taken advantage of this promotion, because I'm offering $252 off. It's the lowest price the Points Master has ever been offered at, and the sale ends tomorrow. So if you've wanted to join, go to the show notes below. You can do that and don't miss out on this sale. So with that, let's talk China. Let's talk Boeing. What is going on? Because this world just seems to get more and more bizarre by the day, and a headline that would have been inconceivable 10 years ago is now just another one in a line of headlines that somehow don't really faze us that much.
You remember how I always am the one waving the flag at how aviation is absolutely intertwined with what happens globally? Well, look no further than the headline of this week, which is that China, the world's second largest aviation sector, has announced a ban on all future Boeing aircraft deliveries. They have instructed all Chinese airlines to suspend any upcoming deliveries. Of course, there are dozens of deliveries just scheduled over the next couple of months to Chinese carriers. There are thousands of Boeing aircraft that make up the fleet, the commercial fleet of China. They have initiated this ban effective immediately following the 145% tariff. This is a figure that has grown and grown and grown between China and the US. This is a 145% tariff being imposed now by President Donald Trump. We have seen that it has affected many other industries, but I think perhaps the most notable is the suspension, because once again, we are now looking at a very imbalanced aviation sector. Dan, you remember how crazy it was perceived, China's decision to have been very early on in banning the 737 MAX, right? And the fallout of everything there. We're now talking about Boeing's entire portfolio of commercial aircraft under suspension because of what is ultimately a worsening dispute between China and the Trump administration.
And obviously, Boeing is not in a great place to begin with. So to have, first of all, the tariffs affecting its supply lines, as we spoke about last week, when supply all over the aviation industry is already a huge challenge to get the parts you need to assemble and to maintain aircraft. So to now lose out on one of the biggest aviation markets in the world because of the decisions of a supposedly America First president is just mind-blowing. And what I do think is interesting here is that perhaps the implications for Boeing, but even more so for Chinese airlines, maybe won't be as big as the headlines suggest. Because my first thought was, okay, so what are the order books of China's major airlines? Because as far as, when I was thinking about this, I was like, well, based on the headlines we've been reading, they've been ordering a lot of Airbus the past few years. Because let's not kid ourselves, before Trump was president again, before the second term, before the tariffs, the relationship between the US and China has just been deteriorating for a while now. Obviously, air traffic, commercial traffic between China and the US is a fraction of what it was before COVID. That has not recovered, and now it certainly does not look like it will recover. So we've kind of seen airlines ordering a lot from Airbus, and I think seeing their order books is just some very interesting evidence of that. The most impacted airline is also one of China's absolute largest airlines, China Southern. Their outstanding orders for one of the world's biggest airlines with hundreds and hundreds of aircraft in service. They have 37 737 MAX 8s that have not been delivered and two 787-9s. So 39 planes for one of the world's biggest airlines. Then if we go to other airlines, massive airlines, like what do we have here? Air China, outstanding Boeing orders, 4 737 MAX 8s at one of China's biggest airlines. And I think that's all. Yeah, that's all from Boeing. Then here at, I'm trying to find China Eastern.
Well, don't forget that three of these airlines, China Southern, China Eastern, and Air China, make up three of the world's largest airlines by passenger volume. There is always incredible demand, and China is growing. Boeing themselves are the first to admit this. Boeing estimated that China will need about 8,500 new aircraft over the next couple of decades, and China still accounts for about 20% of Boeing commercial aircraft deliveries globally when you look at the full picture of total number of aircraft already delivered. The reason why the number may seem less in terms of what's actually on order right now and due for delivery is a few things. As you say, but China's confidence in Boeing was definitely knocked during the 737 MAX crisis, which led on, that continued for a number of years. And that hurt confidence in what should have been China's, workhorse of the skies to go on to replace the older 737s. But also the fact that China and Airbus partnered for Airbus to set up a final assembly line in Tianjin, meaning that Chinese aircraft Chinese Airlines, no longer needed to rely on the Airbus facilities in Hamburg and Toulouse, notably, to make those deliveries to China, but were able to ultimately have a homegrown aircraft. Of course, a lot of European technology, a lot of American technology, a lot of technology from all parts of the world, given how globalized these aircraft manufacturers are and all of the suppliers that they rely on. But they are able to have these aircraft pumped out of a final assembly line super quickly that is already domestically within China. And so almost all of the Tianjin facility is focused on catering to those Chinese airlines. And with Airbus setting up shop there, they did so knowing that China would encourage and would work with its state-owned airlines, ultimately, the big guys, to ensure that they were ordering from the Tianjin facility, or ordering from Airbus rather, and the output would come from Tianjin. So that's why I think that the number probably, Dan, seems a bit less at the moment, just because of the recent state of play. But take note from the fact that China is still Boeing's, of such importance, the second greatest aviation market globally after the United States.
Absolutely. I just think it's interesting to look at this from the perspective of Chinese airlines. How impacted will they be? I managed to pull up China Eastern here. Just for context, they have about almost 80 A320neo family aircraft on order. Meanwhile, they have 13 outstanding deliveries from Boeing. We have Shanghai Airlines, a subsidiary of China Eastern, operating an all Boeing fleet with 88 aircraft. They have 4 outstanding orders from Boeing. So all of these major Chinese airlines won't really see a huge impact on their fleet. I think the really interesting one, which I've seen some discussion about how this will impact them, is Cathay Pacific. Even the vast majority of their outstanding orders are also with Airbus. We have 14 for the A321neo, 30 for the A330neo. But then, of course, the only Boeing order they have, and the Boeing order everyone is waiting for, is the 777X. They have 21 of those on order, so they're not one of the bigger customers. But it begs the question, with them hopefully expecting the aircraft next year, will they be able to receive it, given what has happened in China or in Hong Kong with their relationship with China and all that? And also, personally, I think it's about time for Cathay Pacific to just invest in the A350. They have a huge fleet of A350s. The A350-1000 is an incredible aircraft. They need to stop waiting for a new flagship that we're all, very stressed about, but we don't really see on the horizon yet. And just order more A350-1000s. Start putting their new first class on the A350.
Didn't you literally just fly the business class in their retrofitted 777, right? The Aria suite,
which was supposed to come out on the 777X, but because it's so delayed, they decided to install it on the older 777s. But they have these beautiful A350s, and the 777X is now so old that it won't be that much nicer to fly than an A350, which is already amazing. So from that perspective, I'm just like, okay, isn't it time to be smart about this?
It's incredible how delayed the 777X is, and how it's just getting, it's barely being mentioned anywhere because it's just faded into the background. And also, as each year passes, this aircraft that doesn't yet exist commercially is getting older. And the tech that they, wanted to pioneer with is falling behind the likes of what we're capable with today. So, I was in Hamburg last week, as you know, at the Aircraft Interiors Expo, and I managed to meet with several suppliers. And many of these suppliers are really stuck in a position where they have nothing to commit to in terms of knowing when they can install their flagship seating, their flagship social areas, their new first class, their new economy classes, the latest and greatest premium economy, all tied to this aircraft that everyone is waiting for the same email from Boeing about, and that email hasn't yet come through. There's very little commentary as to what is happening with the 777X in terms of progress. What I will say is that I have heard on the inside, and I have heard from those not just that are directly within Boeing, but those that deal with Boeing specifically waiting for these new aircraft, that Boeing are in a slightly better place and that we should actually take this very, very quiet period as a positive sign, because they are ironing out the issues that they've had surrounding the 777X to hopefully enter service next year. At the same time, I heard from a different customer who had a whole different take on it. He said the silence is because they have no confidence to give the market. They are hoping that everyone is figuring themselves out, and that they are staying quiet because they know how many airlines, suppliers, customers are ready to send their bills to Boeing to say, you're now paying for X, Y, and Z because this was all part of our 10, 15-year plan, and now this aircraft is nowhere to be seen. So it's an interesting one. This tariff situation with the Trump administration and it escalating with China is only going to make the 777X a way more complicated case. Are the prices by the time of the deliveries of the 777X going to reflect the inflated tariff price for goods, like the 777 being exported to the rest of the world? Is the 777X going to face further slowdown with the lack of suppliers willing to comply with these tariffs and the cost of parts and everything coming from everywhere else in the world that will ultimately affect the final price? It's such a mess, I think, is the conclusion. And what I will say is that we're all kind of on this journey together. The airline chiefs that I speak with, the supplier chiefs that I speak with, and all those big key stakeholders are ultimately none the wiser as to what the impact of tariffs will be on something like the 777X, and then to zoom in on that aircraft, when we'll be ever seeing that in commercial use. So we're all on this journey together, the public, us, the humble podcast hosts, and the airline chiefs who have pledged big money for an aircraft that, Trump is playing around with in terms of tariffs, and God knows what the eventual impact will be.
Yeah, so this is just another case in aviation, as with everything else, where a policy from the US was intended to help the US global trade situation, help them achieve their goals, and put their partners or their former partners in a tough position, so they want to negotiate. Instead, this will also end up benefiting the Europeans. The Europeans are now negotiating with China to improve trade relations. So everything that the US was hoping to come out of this is basically not happening. So
there's one slight red flag on that I want to add, which is that the bit that concerns me for the consumer is that this will be thrown about as an excuse for higher fares, for higher anything, right? So no matter what, we're going to get the shrug of the shoulders and say, yeah, well, the flights between, Melbourne and Auckland have gone up because of that old trade war across the water. So there will be so many stakeholders that exploit this. This is not good news for the international, consumer.
Yeah, that's true on the one hand, but depending on how the economy develops, we might also see fares drop quite a bit as demand decreases, potentially, especially for premium travel. Just one last little thing on this topic. One word from Tim Clark, president of Emirates, that we know that his dream, his biggest wish is for the Airbus A380 to come back, be revived, and have a new fuel efficient version. And from my view, and I think, looking from the outside, everything just tells us, like, the way the 777X is going and the way things are going for the US, an airline like Emirates is going to want an A380. So there was one comment he made just to show, obviously you say Airbus won't resume A380 production anytime ever. But he is so hopeful. And there was one interview I was watching with him recently where the last word he says in the interview was something about, well, we're not quite ready to take delivery of more A380s yet. He says, very sort of, wink, wink. And I'm just like, okay, you need to like just go in and order 200 and help us bring this back.
They can't order an aircraft that is not in production. You know,
that's what American Airlines did with the 737 MAX, you know.
Look, I understand that Emirates have the greatest weight when it comes to A380s and the greatest influence because they are the world's largest operator. But I do not think we will see a scenario where we see a Airbus resuming production just for Emirates. But also, I would say, don't you think it's a bit worrying? I mean, the reality that by this point, airlines are like so over the 777X before it's even arrived. It's just such a nightmare scenario for Boeing. And again, I would argue, just not great for the consumer.
Yeah. I mean, the A350-1000 is looking better by the day. I bet every time one rolls by, an Airbus executive is like, you like that?
I think so too. Well, look, this is quite a nice segue in the A380 to a little topic that you and I have been asked to comment or to discuss for quite some time, but we only wanted to do so when it was newsy rather than just the fact that it kind of exists or planned to exist. And of course, we are talking about Global Airlines, the startup in the UK that was aiming to, quote, revolutionize the air travel experience. This project has come under immense criticism, like any super ambitious project would come under, and I fully accept that. Anyone aiming and shooting for the stars in that scenario is going to be ridiculed in the process, and I think that's what has happened with Global Airlines. But when it comes down to actual substance, we said, let us discuss them when there is something to speak about. And now that finally there is something to speak about because their flights are on sale. So they will be proving many wrong by getting an aircraft airborne. Many said that, this will never fly. The bizarre part is that there are 2 flights, not 2 flights per day, not 2 flights per week, not 2 flights per month, but 2 individual standalone flights. One from Glasgow to New York return, one from Manchester to New York return, and that's it. What I'm confused about what this project is shaping up to be.
This feels like a very Trump era airline to me, in the sense that anyone can say they're going to start an airline, and I guess a used A380 is not that expensive at this point. Operating a flight is expensive, but getting an AOC is expensive.
True. And difficult, incredibly difficult. The regulatory hurdles, the safety considerations, the finances, everything that is required. And the UK is incredibly strict as a civil aviation authority. It's not going to be issuing AOCs easily.
Yeah. So this Global Airlines doesn't need one because they're launching flights in partnership with charter airline Highfly, which has actually operated A380s in the past unsuccessfully. Yeah. But now this airline, basically piggybacking on an existing charter airline, will be operating these 2 round-trip flights to New York from different parts of the UK, where the aircraft will stay on the ground in New York, presumably for a few days. And this is obviously, a good way to show that they're serious, because operating an A380 across the Atlantic is not cheap. That costs a lot of money. But everything up until this point has just literally made no sense at all in terms of how you actually start an airline. The airline went out quickly announcing they'd be serving Laurent Perrier champagne on board. They went out talking about how they're going to have a status match promotion, how they're going to offer caviar in first class. And I think most famously, they spoke about having what they called gamer class on their Airbus A380s, which, bizarre. What is that? That's not a thing. Yeah.
I think they scrapped that pretty quickly, didn't they? Or they scrapped the concept of that. It's easy to scrap things when they don't exist, and I think that's what they did. But these 2 standalone flights are not... I mean, I don't understand the point of these flights, because it's not route proving. It's not so that they can obtain a license. The flight is operated by Highfly. Highfly have an A380 experience. Now, you described it as unsuccessful A380 experience, but it doesn't take away from the fact that for a period of time, They were operating. Highfly is the wet lease company, right? That airlines will call in when they need assistance. Maybe it's a planned charter for a football team, or maybe it's an emergency because the airline have staff going on strike and they need extra capacity, and Highfly will step in.
Or
so,
or
example,
it's just because they don't have enough aircraft. So a lot of airlines will actually bring Highfly in to operate regularly scheduled flights all over the world. They do that. So
exactly. So they're the ones stepping in, operating on behalf of the customer, which is the airline, not you. In this scenario, Global, in partnership with the project Global Airlines, in partnership with Highfly, have been able to negotiate a deal where Highfly hold on to the A380. It's an A380 that belongs to Global, but will be operated by Highfly, who have the experience of operating, flying, having this aircraft operate within the constraints of airports that are often not so A380 friendly or A380 specific. Highfly have all of that figured out. So Global were able to establish up this partnership and then still have this aim of being a quote, an airline, but with a very unclear strategy as to if ever they will operate on a scheduled basis, if they will ultimately operate as a standalone carrier. The economics for a standalone A380 operator with a few A380s would be a disaster and would be incredibly difficult to justify, not just to any shareholder or investor, but just to be able to justify the overheads and the operational burden of operating something as costly as an A380 that is incredibly costly and difficult for the largest, most significant, richest players to operate, like Emirates. So you can imagine the difficulty when it comes to Global. The fares are not so cheap, but they are hoping that the buzz around this so far PowerPoint airline will be enough to get passengers involved. So they're selling a first class fare for almost $9,000. A business class will be around $5,000, and economy is coming in at just over 1,000. And if you want flexibility, well, they're able to provide you with none because, as I say, they are operating on 2 specific dates. And your point of origin is only really possible if you're flying from Glasgow or Manchester on these 2 dates in May. If we were discussing a project, Dan, this was the latest chapter in unlocking something in terms of, as I said, route proving or the XYZ, none of that has been declared. Maybe that is the case. None of that's been declared. This just seems like, at the moment, a way in which to say to everyone, you see, we got there in the end. We flew. We're an airline now. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the case with,
having
2
put
charter flights.
Having put your branding on a flight does not make you a real airline, at least in my opinion. But the real question is, people are, as you said, $9,000 for first class, $5,000 for business class. We don't even know what the cabin looks like yet. Presumably, because cabins cost, like one first class seat costs as much as a sports car. So even that is a massive investment. Presumably that means this aircraft, this A380, which is former China Southern, is just retaining the old China Southern seats, which, let's remember, are quite worn out and old at this point and also haven't been used for many years. So they're asking people, and also charging over $1,000 for economy class on some random dates operating out of Glasgow when you could get cheaper flights on established, fully serious airlines is just crazy when you don't know what you're going to get. So to me, this...
I mean, this is just, they've just informed the world of 2 charter flights. That's what they've done. And again, I really wonder what the motive is. Is it because they had a condition whereby they had to, they had to get something in the air by, Q2 25, and this is their way of being able to satisfy that requirement, and everyone is none the wiser? Is it that they think, let's go for it, let's just start and then see what follows? It's all very unclear. If you guys are listeners, if you have your ideas about what this project Global Airlines is really for, or what the motive is behind this, we're very keen to hear your thoughts with it.
Yeah, and I do know that the main founder of the airline is friends with a few of my airline vlogging friends. So I
Okay.
think we could see some videos from the flights, and I think those could do quite well just because people are so curious about
Yeah.
this strange startup airline. When did we last have a startup airline in Europe proposing transatlantic flights, let alone on A380s with supposedly a luxurious experience? So I think, it's an exciting prospect, but it is just such an incredible challenge, and I don't think that this airline will be the one to overcome the hurdles that are necessary, especially when we see
Yeah.
huge established airlines struggling already as it is.
Yeah. No, it's a difficult one. Well, look, let's move from one lack of a real kind of full service carrier to one that wants to move more into the full service world. None other than Dan's home airline, not the special forces, but the Scandinavian flag carrier for Scandinavia, many countries. They're kind of flying the flag for the region. SAS, what have they announced?
That was such a missed opportunity for you to just roast SAS. And instead, like, we were talking about what we kind of called maybe an unserious airline, and then you're like, over to a serious airline.
We should have said from one unserious airline to another.
That's what I thought you were going to say, but okay. No, obviously
I'm far too
SAS is a
polite.
serious airline, and don't you just love them? The airlines that belong, my nationalities, US and Sweden. I have SAS, United, American, Delta, and a few others. It's just a great life. But anyway,
Actually, I've just realized you cut you open and you're Star Alliance inside.
Lufthansa Star Alliance. That's why
Yeah.
Lufthansa is where I meet in the middle, and that's why I loved them so much as a kid. I do find it so
Yeah.
funny. I just took 3 flights on Lufthansa. How they always how they don't say Lufthansa and the Star Alliance. It's always just Lufthansa Star Alliance.
It's
Thank you
not
for flying
Lufthansa
with
Star Alliance. It's Lufthansa Star Alliance.
depending on who says it. But it's always, they always say it in every announcement. Thank you for flying Lufthansa Star Alliance, which I think is
Yeah.
cute. They're
Taking
really,
ownership.
it's
Ownership of
good
that
to
alliance.
see. It's good to see an airline actually care about an alliance in 2025.
That's true.
So,
That's true.
SAS, Scandinavian Airlines, not the Special Forces, which would be funny too, but Scandinavian Airlines is finally getting rid of their just below par, miserable intra-European premium cabin, which they have called SAS Plus. Now, granted, the pricing of this cabin called SAS Plus has consistently been lower than any intra-European business class. But what have you gotten because of that? No, not even a blocked middle seat. You've gotten an economy seat in a cabin with no curtain, with no divider. So basically, you're paying extra for everything you get with status, basically, like more checked luggage, a lounge sometimes,
Yeah.
priority boarding. That's what you're paying more for. So in some cases, it might have represented good value if you don't have status. But in general, like last year, I spoke about this on the podcast when I was rebooked from British Airways Club Europe, which again is not, anything to write home about. But I was rebooked to SAS Plus in a middle seat, paying the same price. That's when I wasn't so happy about SAS.
Yeah. That was
So
rough.
SAS has announced, largely because they have now been acquired partly by Air France KLM, that they will finally be reintroducing an intra-European business class. And what does that mean? They will be blocking the middle seat, guys, and so funny in those photos they've been posting, they will be introducing a curtain between cabins.
Goodness. I don't know if our listeners were ready for this.
They literally posted photos of the curtain as if like, check out our curtain, guys. This is big stuff.
We love a curtain. I mean,
And remember, you're still sitting in an economy class seat with no headrest even on SAS. So
Yeah, true.
it's just funny, but I'd say it's overall good news because at least
Yeah.
people connecting to long haul business, that type of thing,
Well,
will have a bit more comfort.
That's the exact, from a purely, from a non-Scandinavian perspective and taking out the emotion that you are absolutely ridden with this bloody airline. I see it as pragmatically super sensible for those that are paying very high fares, to maybe treating themselves maybe on business, whatever, leisure, to fly business and connect. And especially in Scandinavia, sometimes you have to feed into one of the bigger hubs to be able to reach somewhere like New York, and now have that consistency with somewhat of a decent offering, rather than being, sat next to someone on both sides and thinking, is this supposedly, business class? But it's funny, the whole, we've spoken at length about the middle seat concepts and how, we're so ripped off in Europe with it, and the pros and the cons and whatever. One of my friends was telling me that the other day he was flying he's based in Doha, and so of course they're used to the home carrier, Qatar Airways, and he was flying from Paris to Milan, and he arrived at the check-in hall at Charles de Gaulle, and he went to the kiosk because big check-in 1, and so he went to that kiosk and he typed in his booking reference, and it was error. Because big check-in's a loser, right? And then it was error again.
Take down big check-in.
Literally. And again. And so he called a staff member. Common sense. But however, this isn't the big check-in story. This is more about, this happens to so many people. He was informed by the staff member that, oh yeah, you do have a valid booking and your flight is Air France, blah, 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 to Milan. And it is at this time. It's just next month. It's not this month. You're 1 month early. So they were like, oh God, what do we do? So he said, we had no choice. There was one seat left he said, and the good thing is, he said, there was one seat left, but at least it was going to be in business class. So he paid for the seat. Heaven only knows how much this poor guy paid, right? Because we know last minute fares on a mainline service, especially Air France, which are so expensive compared to other European carriers, on a premium route like Paris to Milan. The poor guy, I dread to think. Anyway, he goes to me, and I knew what was coming, the whole story. He goes, I got on, and I was like, where is it? Where's the business class? And they were staring at him going, what? And he said, where's the business class? They said, it's here. And he was like, no, this is economy. Where is business? My ticket says business. And they had this back and forward exchange. He was shaken
I love
to his core that he could not comprehend the idea. He said to me, it was the same seat. What have I just paid for? Why did they tell me it was business? Then I started to think, should the scenario in Europe have been from very early on, should all the European airlines have agreed to not refer to Euro business as business class, but instead all of them set the expectation together that we're offering premium economy in Europe? And then you wouldn't have, you wouldn't be featured on air with Dan and Alex. Instead, people would understand what they were getting involved with. But, his example must happen daily to those who are not as aware of what it is. And I just wonder if that was a conversation that needed to be revisited. Should airlines have been coming together early on and saying, let us be a bit honest about what we're offering here?
For sure. I just think that in that case, people connecting to or from business class, I think they try to call it business class. So they're like, no, we have business class. We don't need to introduce anything else. And that's sort of supposed to satisfy people. But this story reminds me of when on my first Lufthansa flight, when I was leaving Sweden, Gothenburg to Frankfurt, it was so funny. So we were in row 1 because we were connecting to long haul business. Otherwise, obviously, I wouldn't pay for that. But there were these American girls who boarded, and they said so loudly, they were like, oh my God, that's business class? Can you believe that was $400? Thank God we didn't pay for that.
Yeah.
So loudly so that every passenger in business class could hear. And they're like, this seat looks terrible. And I'm like, I know, girls.
Yeah, it's an ironing board. It's an ironing board.
Yeah, especially on Lufthansa. So
yeah.
The other thing I just have to say going back to SAS and Scandinavia is that The truth is that Scandinavia is a tough market, especially for inter-European flights. For airlines to compete, there's so much low-cost competition. And for SAS, they're in this tough place where people are not really willing to pay a premium for economy, let alone for a premium cabin, while, competing with super low-cost airlines. So what we saw, for example, what I saw on this flight that I took from Gothenburg to Frankfurt, and that I generally see to or from Scandinavia, is that there were like 4 people in a maybe 4 or 5 row business class cabin. So there's almost no one there. And then economy is fully booked. What does that tell me? Well, we know that airlines like Lufthansa Group, or Air France KLM charge ridiculously high prices for their premium cabins. And clearly the pricing is off for Lufthansa Business, because I guess it should be so low that it's a no-brainer for all of these people just to spend a little more. Lufthansa gets a little more revenue and it's a win-win, which is basically what British Airways does with their Club Europe, right? So
BA Club Europe on their premium leisure routes, it is half the aircraft. It is so full. Everyone is, and it's just, I think, wow, this business model is never going to go away, because it's just, if, as I said, half the aircraft, Nice, Malaga, all these kind of premium, Geneva, it is crazy how many, and they're not connecting. That they started their journey in Heathrow.
Well, that's what happens when you have reasonable price and you charge a reasonable premium, so that people can basically get all the benefits you would get of status without even needing to have status in some cases. Or historically, people were doing that to earn a lot of extra tier points, which maybe they won't be doing anymore. But that, every
I myself
dollar...
I've paid I've paid many times a very reasonable, cheap fare for Club Europe, BA's Club Europe, just because it was cheaper than adding 2 suitcases.
Yes, exactly.
And so I'm like, okay, that makes absolute sense.
Yeah, especially so for example, I think that sometimes economy one way from London to Gothenburg might be £100, and then Club Europe might be £200. And then you think about what you get. You go from 0 free checked bags on that economy fare to multiple free 32 kilo bags in Club Europe. Yeah. You get priority security, you get a lounge, you get an empty seat next to you, you get a meal, and suddenly that premium seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, no, you're right. Kudos to BA's pricing structure with Club Europe for being perhaps the most reasonable on the European landscape, and previously was a way for people to earn points, tier points, and whatever. But now we know they've set fire to all of that, so we don't need to revisit that. Aegean of Greece could be could take a bit of a leaf out of BA's book with their pricing. Some of their fares are just extortionate. They also think they are Emirates. I mean, in terms of their offering, they really do believe that they are offering you something that is on par with this beautifully international, high-end, fine dining experience in the air. And they need a reality check, because while they are definitely one of the better European carriers, we're not talking full service, Singapore Airlines here.
We're talking European carrier, meaning that almost any other airline in business class will probably be better. So, that's the unfortunate reality. With that, we have so much Q&A as always. Yeah, let's jump into it.
All right, let's kick things off with a question from Adrian. Adrian is asking what our thoughts are on the reports over the last few days that British Airways have been involved in multiple drug busts, most recently involving a Boeing 777-200 that had just flown from Orlando to London Gatwick. After the flight, the aircraft arrived into the hangar for routine maintenance, and while this maintenance was underway, an engineer found a brick of cocaine valued at £100,000 in the hidden panel located behind the bin in one of the lavatories. This is now a case that is being handled by Border Force, the National Crime Agency in the UK as well. It's the second drug bust in a matter of days involving a Gatwick-based Boeing 777. And previously, the one that happened a few days ago was a Cancun to London flight that was also cancelled after they found loads of drugs stashed on board. Right, okay. Let's get into it. What do we think? I'll give you my quick reaction. I spoke to a few people that I know at the airline about this, and the assumption, at least from the investigation so far, is that this involved a staff member. Somehow this is involving a staff member. Now, to what extent, of course, is unknown. Does drug trafficking involving commercial aircraft happen? Yes, and that is why there are checks involved to reduce that. But yeah, I mean, we'll keep an eye. Really weird. I mean, did someone spot a kind of a weakness in the Gatwick base fleet, or a lack of checks and accountability in everything that is done to prevent this kind of thing? I'm not sure. I don't know. Our thoughts on this are limited, other than it being absolutely peculiar and it seeming like it involves some kind of staff member.
Yeah, I think just look at which staff member is driving around in an unusually flashy car or wearing unusually flashy clothes, because I feel like that tends to go hand in hand with, transporting drugs over international borders. So perhaps that's a good place to start. But
crazy.
Yeah, crazy.
I've got a question from James. He's asking a question for both of us. He says, given our extensive knowledge in aviation, a two-part question. What is one assumption of the aviation industry that we had previously held, and what changed our view or perspective? This is a really insightful, nice little conversation starter, James, that definitely requires thought that I'm trying to give now. I'm going to go on two bases, right, to give you a chance, Dan, because I had previously seen this question. One assumption of the aviation industry I previously held. On a society and a social basis, I thought as the years go on, passengers will, and as aviation reaches more of the world, there will be more decorum and a better level of sensibility among society in the cabin. And I did not think, my reality check is that what has changed my perspective is flying all around the world and seeing the decline of it in so-called the Western world, specifically Europe and the US. I just think that previously I thought that people would have a better understanding of how to behave in somewhere like the confines of an aircraft cabin. And I think year in, year out, year on year, we are continued to be proven wrong, sadly. On the flip side, a more serious answer, I think previously I had doubted the sheer, and when I say previously, I would say about, let's say 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago, I don't think I properly had always considered the sheer impacts of just the slightest delay or just the slightest complication. And now I think I'm fully aware to the extent of it. And I'm not talking about the delay in terms of compensation and things. I'm talking about food expiring. I'm talking about, things going out of hours that we can't even consider, that are already happening on other time zones where the aircraft is due. And just the sheer complex web that is commercial aviation. What about you?
Nice. One thing, I think, before I had flown as many airlines as I've flown now, and we're lucky to fly premium cabins a lot, but one thing I think I assumed is that there would be a huge difference in flying economy class on the likes of Qatar Airways or Emirates or Singapore Airlines compared to flying the airlines we were used to from back home, maybe BA or SAS or Lufthansa or whatever. But I think the truth is that there's only so much you can do in economy, and where these airlines set themselves apart is really in small touches, like offering an ice cream extra that you wouldn't get on another airline, or maybe having slightly nicer staff, that kind of thing. But people, all the time will text me and say, oh, I was so excited for my economy flight with this 5-star airline, and I ended up being super disappointed. And I think that's sort of what I used to assume as well, that the difference would be so huge, but you have to really look at the tiny details to see what makes them different in that case.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think people sometimes have a far more, people are better in their experience and feel better and feel more satisfied if they have gone through life on narrow-body aircraft and then they fly on a big wide-body for the first time. I think then when you hear people fly the A380, no matter what cabin, they were super excited by it. And so I think that can help, but there's very little, as you said, that can set apart one economy class to the other. That's true.
Yeah. So I am going through now, guys. It's great if you send your questions to the On Air with Dan and Alex Instagram account, which you're also free to go answer. Guys, we have so many DMs here, which I'm sorry we just get overwhelmed with Q&A, but we're going to try to answer as many of these as quickly as we can. So Carl asks, actually the first message we ever got on this account. So shout out to Carl.
Okay.
He says, would you recommend going to the Paris Air Show when I'm an Aussie visiting Europe in the summer as general admission? Absolutely. For an av geek,
Definitely.
I think it would be so much fun. Yeah. Do it. Then we have a question here from Josh. He has a question regarding claiming compensation for delayed and canceled flights as a result of the recent Heathrow closure. Will this event be classified as an extraordinary circumstance? No, unfortunately not. You might have heard that we discussed this. Sorry to give you that news. Oz says, love the podcast. I've been going back to older episodes to keep me entertained during my rush hour commutes. That's amazing. I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on the current state of European flights from Kuwait, my home airport. Over the last year, we've lost service from KLM, Lufthansa, and now shockingly from BA. These airlines have served Kuwait for decades, and it's sad to see them go so quickly. And Dan, when are you going to review Kuwait Airways? Well, stay tuned for that. But
goodness, we are staying tuned for that. I mean, there's a bombshell if ever there was one. When are we getting the Kuwait Airways review?
I just before recording this episode, I narrated the video. So
God,
things
so you're
are
fresh
in the
from
works.
the trauma. Hey, how about we scrap the rest of Q&A and we have a little therapy session now, just us and the listeners, and tell us exactly what went down on that Kuwait Airways flight.
This is a great little teaser for you guys, and I'm not going to tell you, but I do need your help, Alex. I need your advice and maybe some advice from the podcast community as well on how I can convey what a SHIT show this experience was without coming across really annoying and whiny. So I tried my best in the narration for the review, but then after that, because I realized this video will be an hour otherwise, I'm also recording a sit-down video that will be up like 2 days later where I tell the whole story. So that's where I need to be careful.
I would recommend, and I've given you this advice, but I'm going to repeat it since we're on the podcast and you asked. I would recommend you stay factual, okay? You stay accurate. You're entitled to give your opinion because everyone is entitled to their opinion. But I think in this scenario, as to what happened to you, and I know, and what went down, the facts will speak for themselves. And I don't think you will have to do any convincing to the viewer or listener as to why you thought this was outrageous or why you thought it was a shit show or whatever. I think that you will, if you are able to accurately convey the facts, I think that will be enough. And I know what happened, and I know that you will not be exaggerating in this scenario because heck knows you don't need to. It was already bad enough. The poor guy. Now everyone's wondering what it is. What on earth we're talking about.
And I think we can also say confidently that what it ends up being is as bad as you would expect based on how we're hinting at it here. So
I mean you're all right because we're really now teeing it up. You're fine. You're on the podcast. Hurt. Well, we'll stay tuned for that for sure. Yeah. Let's go to quickly this question from Sean. So last week when I was at
answer the question. We just started talking about me. The question was, why are European airlines leaving Kuwait?
Who asked the question?
This was from Oz.
Okay,
I
Oz,
think AWS. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it.
I think it is a travesty that that Kuwait has lost so many European carriers. I don't think it's ever the direction that Kuwait thought would be the direction that they would follow, because they are kind of following this. It's not by coincidence. It's not an accident. I just think it's a combination of two things. Firstly, I don't see the economic development in Kuwait that has filtered out to the rest of the world as very evident just yet. Kuwait is categorically one of, if not the richest countries in the world. And yet, in terms of them actually doing anything or being as loud as the likes of Saudi Arabia, whether it's becoming hosts of international conferences, whether they're going for global sporting events, whether they are, wanting to be big in tech. They're ticking none of these boxes, which is a shame, because I think the Kuwaiti people deserve better in terms of being able to show off their country. And I hope that there is more motivation to do more, to show off what Kuwait has to offer, which it does. And so I think with the lack of anything going for Kuwait globally, the European carriers have had very little reason to continue direct service there when it's being so well served by their One World or other partners in the Gulf, like Qatar or Royal Jordanian. And they're thinking, okay, let them just take on the flow. And most people that are going to Kuwait anyway are probably willing to do a stop and fly indirect. And so that's why I think Kuwait has lost so many carriers. And I don't think Kuwait thought that in 2025 they would be down to the lowest number of European carriers ever compared with 20 years ago.
Yeah. My serious answer to this is that airlines all over Europe and the world are struggling with aircraft shortages. That's part of this as well, needing to decide where to send capacity. That's definitely part of it for British Airways. And also, Heathrow is so tightly slot controlled. So BA, I'm sure, would love to fly everywhere if they could, but they have to make financial choices and look at which routes are performing, which are not. Kuwait, I think we've spoken about this before, was pretty consistently the flight that was most commonly canceled out of Heathrow when they had to slash a few flights.
It was
and that
so
sort of
easy
says
for them
something.
to just rebook to Qatar, wasn't it? And so
that says something about that. Then my unserious answer to this is just that everyone wants to fly Kuwait Airways. What can I say? Everyone just loves Kuwait Airways. They're fantastic.
Sure. Sean, back to his question. This was while I was at the Aircraft Interiors Expo in Hamburg. I posted a suite, and it was a single aisle first class seat that hasn't actually been ordered by any airlines yet, but it was a beautiful mini suite, perfect to enter an A321 like aircraft, and you have it in a 1-1 configuration. So Sean says a question, after seeing this, I was wondering whether you think some airlines would go for something like this for shorter flights, like the Southeast Asian carriers, or would they stick to the current seat types? He says, I can tell this is meant for like an A321 LR, but better Asian carriers could consider this for lower capacity routes that wouldn't be as profitable on the A350. Think Singapore Airlines and others. Would love to hear your thoughts. And I love the podcast with you and the guy with the American accent, who I can only assume is yourself. So, Sean, you're absolutely right. Those kind of products, those kind of premium new developments, the premium first class that is designed for single aisle, are not simply being tailored only for the likes of the 9-hour transatlantics connecting Middle America with Western Europe, for example, but they are also being hammered into, they are being put on a show for airlines that invest in very premium heavy configurations like Singapore Airlines, to maybe try to show, look, you guys don't need to fly a 787-10 or an A350 if offering a very, very decent premium product is the motivation there. You can do that on a single aisle, and this is how you can achieve it. Here is that first class solution.
Well, we just have to be real about the fact that flying any cabin on a narrow body does not compare to flying it on a wide body. That especially goes for first class.
We know.
So look,
We've
if you're
discussed
gonna pay first class prices, there's so many complexities that come into it. For an airline like Singapore Airlines that offers a very elaborate in-flight service, while the galley is tiny and airlines struggle enough with business class, how are they supposed to prepare elaborate crew-plated meals in first class? How are they supposed to have a premium-feeling lavatory dedicated to first class and then additional lavatories for business class behind? So with this said, the cabin I am most curious to see this year, which I suspect we will get to see very soon, is Etihad's first class on their A321 Neos, which I think shocked everyone when we saw they will actually have 2 first class seats on each of these aircraft. Obviously, I think we're expecting more of a Starlux style business class plus first class hybrid, but I can't wait to see how they do it. Will they have a curtain? I doubt it. Will they have a dedicated lavatory? I doubt it. all of these things will need to be answered, but the price that they are charging are true first class prices. So it's all very interesting.
Willis is asking why, I'm going to paraphrase, Willis is asking why the people in front of him take so long to check in, but he's done in less than a minute. I mean, it's quite a valid observation. I just think if you listen to On Air, you're probably a decent traveller anyway in terms of being ready with the right document, no questions, seat allocation done. You might have checked in online already. You probably have a passport that has already the correct entry requirements for the place you're going to. And so you probably are a guy with very little uncertainty as to what's going to happen in that exchange at the check-in counter, and that's why you check in so fast. I would argue that the rest of the world are not going to have that situation as situated as you by the time they get to check-in. That's why it seems to take longer.
Perfectly said. So we have time for one more question here, which I really have no idea how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry, it's Vietnamese, but Oan maybe. I'm sorry about that, but the question is, I'm transiting through the UK in summer 2025. I've searched the internet and read through the official UK immigration site, but just so I'm 1,000% sure, we're going to Zurich in a few months and we'll transit through Heathrow with British Airways. Do we need to apply for an ETA for transit?
As of now, no. They've scrapped that. But who knows? But you check the date when you're listening to this episode.
Here's what I would say. Depending on what passport you have, if it's easy or cheap for you to get a UK visa, or I guess since you're saying an ETA, you're eligible, I would say just do it. It literally takes 5 minutes. It costs almost nothing in the grand scheme of a trip. Multiple entry, valid for 2 years. I applied for mine the first day I could as a European citizen, just because it's nice to have it, not have to worry about what if.
That's true.
So that's my advice on that. But anyway, on that note, what a fun episode full of highs and lows and Points Master sales that you can check out at the link below.
And the endless plugs, Let's just wrap already.
All right. Well, on that note, we will see you all next week, next Wednesday, right here on air. Bye-bye.
See you later.